The deviled eggs arrive in a Pyrex dish with a cracked lid carried across the cul-de-sac by a man in a polo shirt so faded you can barely read the logo anymore. Cliff, 62, retired last spring from the VA hospital in Richmond, sets them on the folding table between the coleslaw and the store-bought cookies, nods at a neighbor, and pours himself a lemonade in a Solo cup. His watch is a Casio, $22 on Amazon. His sedan, a 2014 Camry with a dent on the rear bumper he never bothered fixing, sits at the curb where it always sits. The soles of his New Balance sneakers are worn flat on the outside edges, the way shoes get when someone walks the same route to the same mailbox for the same 15 years. Across the street, Vivian pulls in, 63, leased SUV, still smells new, linen blouse, sunglasses that cost more than Cliff's entire outfit, including the shoes. She's telling someone about the Mediterranean cruise she's booking for October, 11 days, balcony cabin somewhere along the Amalfi Coast. She was a VP of Human Resources at a mid-sized manufacturing firm, 26 years in the private sector. Peak salary, $145,000 a year. Cliff never made more than $85,000 in his life. And if you asked anyone at this block party, anyone who's in better financial shape, every single one of them would point at Vivian. It's not even close. She looks like money. He looks like a man who clips coupons. They'd be wrong. Cliff's net worth is roughly $1.4 million. Vivian's is about $680,000. He has more than double what she has. And he earned, on average, about 60% of her salary across his career. This isn't a story about one lucky government worker. This is about a pattern, a statistically measurable pattern, and once you see the 5 forces behind it, you'll understand why the most unglamorous employer in America keeps quietly producing more millionaires per payroll dollar than companies that pay twice as much. Let me put some numbers on this before we go any further. The Federal Retirement Thrift Investment Board, the agency that runs the TSP, the government's version of a 401k, reported that as of late 2024, there were over 113,000 TSP accounts with balances above $1 million. Out of roughly 6.7 million participants. Now, that might not sound like a huge percentage, about 1.7%, but here's where it gets interesting. When you control for salary, when you compare federal employees earning between $70,000 and $90,000 a year against private sector workers in the same income bracket, the federal workers are hitting millionaire status at a significantly higher rate. Fidelity's own data on 401k millionaires tells a similar story from the other side. The private sector workers reaching 7 figures tend to be clustered in much higher income bands, 6 figures and up, often well into the 150s, 160s. The private sector millionaires are disproportionately people who earned a lot. The government millionaires, they're disproportionately people who earned normally. Cliff made $85,000 at his peak, and he crossed $1 million. Vivian made $145,000 at her peak, and she didn't. That's not an anecdote. That's a signal. And when a signal shows up at this scale across millions of participants, across decades, across every region of the country, it stops being about the people and starts being about the machine they're inside. This is architecture. And over the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through the 5 forces, 5 structural institutional forces that explain why the federal government keeps producing this result. Not because federal workers are smarter with money, not because they're more disciplined, but because the system they work inside was designed, sometimes accidentally, sometimes deliberately, to make wealth accumulation the default outcome. The private sector was designed to do something else entirely, and that design has consequences. Cliff's first day at the VA hospital was in 1993. He was 31 years old. He sat down at a metal desk in a beige cubicle with fluorescent lighting that buzzed just loud enough to notice. Someone from HR handed him a stack of paperwork, and somewhere in that stack between the emergency contact form and the parking pass was a TSP enrollment form. He didn't study it. He didn't run projections. He checked a box, picked a contribution rate, 5%, because that's what the person next to him said she did, and moved on to figuring out where the break room was. That moment, that 5-minute, barely conscious decision is the first force. The federal government auto-enrolls employees into the TSP, and it matches up to 5%. You don't have to understand compound interest. You don't have to believe in the stock market. You don't even have to want to save. The system puts you in, gives you free money on top, and makes you go out of your way to stop. Vivian's first corporate job in 1985, no 401k at all. Her second employer in 1991 offered one, but enrollment was opt-in. She didn't sign up for 3 years. Not because she was irresponsible, because she was 29, paying off student loans, and nobody sat her down and said, you need to do this. By the time Vivian started contributing to her first 401k in 1994, Cliff already had a year of contributions compounding with a full 5% match. And I want to pause here because this detail matters more than it seems. The private sector didn't widely adopt auto-enrollment until after the Pension Protection Act of 2006. That's 20 plus years after the government was already doing it. 2 decades of head start. 2 decades where the default for private sector employees was do nothing, save nothing. And we know from behavioral economics research from the work of people like Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein that defaults are destiny. Most people don't override the default. They don't opt in. They don't opt out. They just go with whatever the form says. For Cliff, the default was save. For Vivian, the default was don't. The most powerful force in wealth building isn't return on investment. It's whether someone built the on-ramp for you. Here's something nobody tells you about government pay scales, and it's counterintuitive enough that most people dismiss it immediately. The GS pay scale has a ceiling. Cliff was a GS 12. Even with locality adjustments and step increases over 31 years, his salary moved slowly, predictably, almost boringly. He went from $42,000 in 1993 to $85,000 at retirement. That's an average annual increase of about 3%, barely keeping up with inflation some years. Now on the surface, that looks like a raw deal, and if you measure careers purely by peak earnings, it is. But compensation ceilings do something that nobody talks about in personal finance content. They put a structural cap on lifestyle inflation. Cliff's lifestyle adapted to a salary that grew at 3% a year. His mortgage was sized to a government salary. His car expectations were set by a government salary. His vacation budget, his dining habits, his wardrobe, all of it was calibrated to a paycheck that never surprised him. And because the paycheck never surprised him, his expenses never surprised him either. He knew, within a few $100s, what every month was going to look like. For 31 years, Vivian's career looked completely different. She got a 14% raise when she moved to her second company, 22% when she jumped to the third. A title bump and stock options at the fourth. Each leap felt like progress. Each one came with congratulations, a nicer office, and a new peer group with slightly more expensive habits. Bigger house, better neighborhood, European vacations instead of camping trips, a leased car because she deserved it after everything she'd put in. Private school for the kids because the other VPs were doing it. She wasn't being reckless. She was doing what the system incentivized her to do. Earn more, spend proportionally more, feel like she was advancing. Every financial magazine, every career coach, every dinner party conversation reinforced the same message: you're moving up. Your lifestyle should reflect that. But here's the math nobody runs. Cliff saved roughly 12 to 15% of a salary that barely moved. Vivian saved roughly 6 to 8% of a salary that nearly tripled. In absolute dollars, Cliff's annual contributions weren't dramatically different from Vivian's, but because his lifestyle never expanded, his money stayed invested. And because her lifestyle kept expanding, hers kept leaking. The government pay ceiling isn't a bug. For wealth building, it's a feature. A guardrail nobody asked for that works precisely because nobody asked for it. If you've been on this channel a while, you've heard me talk about the FERS pension and how it works as a retirement income floor. I'm not going to repeat the mechanics. I've covered that in detail before. What I want to focus on here is the structural consequence, what it does to the rest of the money. Because this force doesn't just help, it fundamentally changes the role of every other dollar in the system. When Cliff retired after 31 years at a GS-12 level, his FERS pension pays him roughly $22,000 a year, adjusted for inflation, for life. That check shows up whether the stock market is up 40% or down 40%. Whether interest rates are at 2 or at 7, it doesn't care. It's a floor, and floors don't move. Add his Social Security benefit, around $23,000, and Cliff has a guaranteed income floor of about $45,000 a year before he touches a single dollar of his TSP. His annual expenses? about $38,000, which means his TSP, the 1.4 million, has no job. It doesn't need to replace his paycheck. It doesn't need to generate income. It doesn't need to survive a bad sequence of returns in the first 5 years of retirement. It just sits there, compounding like a trust fund he accidentally built over 3 decades of cubicle life. Now think about what that means in practical terms. Cliff can ride out a bear market without selling a share. He can ignore financial news entirely. He can let the money grow for another decade if he wants, or leave it untouched for his kids. The pension removed the single greatest risk retirees face: needing to withdraw from a shrinking portfolio. Vivian has no pension, zero. Her old employer froze their defined benefit plan in 2004 and replaced it with a slightly enhanced 401k match. So her $680,000 in retirement savings isn't surplus, it's the whole plan. It's the paycheck, the safety net, and the inheritance all in one account, all carrying the same risk. At a 4% withdrawal rate, that gives her about $27,000 a year from the portfolio. Add Social Security, roughly $21,000, and she's at $48,000. Sounds workable until healthcare hits. This is the force that gets the least attention and does the most damage on the private sector side. Cliff has FEHB, the Federal Employees Health Benefits Program. He kept it into retirement because he had 5 years of continuous coverage. His annual premium after the government subsidy, about $6,000, covers him and his wife, no age rating, no exclusions for pre-existing conditions. It follows him for life. Vivian retired at 63. She's 2 years away from Medicare. Her COBRA ran out after 18 months. She's on an ACA marketplace plan now. Premium, $14,200 a year for a mid-tier plan. And she's healthy. If she weren't, it'd be worse. That's an $8,000 annual difference every year. And it's not temporary, even after 65. When Vivian gets Medicare, she's paying for a Medigap supplement plus Part D prescription coverage. She's still spending $9,000 to $10,000 a year on health care. Cliff is still paying $6,000. Fidelity published a study estimating that the average 65-year-old couple retiring today needs about $315,000 saved specifically for healthcare costs in retirement. That's not for long-term care. That's just insurance premiums, copays, deductibles, and prescriptions over the course of a typical retirement. $315,000 just for healthcare. Cliff doesn't have that line item. The government absorbed it. Vivian does, and it comes straight out of her $680,000. When you subtract the healthcare reserve from Vivian's portfolio, her effective investable net worth drops to somewhere around $365,000. That's the money she actually gets to live on, invest, and maybe leave to her kids. Cliff stays at $1.4 million because his healthcare costs are a rounding error, not a reserve. That's the moat, not a metaphor, a structural financial moat. And it's the force most private sector retirees don't see until they're standing on the wrong side of it. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reports that the average tenure for a federal employee is over 12 years. For workers across all sectors, it's 4.1 years. And among private sector professionals in Vivian's bracket, mid to senior management, the average is closer to 5. Now, the private sector will tell you that's a good thing. Mobility means opportunity. New companies, new challenges, higher pay. And in terms of career development, that's probably true. But in terms of compounding, it's a disaster. Vivian changed companies 4 times across her career. Each move came with a raise. Each raise felt like a win. And she was right to take them. She wasn't doing anything irrational. But here's what each move also came with: a new 401k plan. New vesting schedules, sometimes 3 years, sometimes 5, which meant leaving unvested matching dollars on the table. New decisions about what to do with the old account: roll it over, leave it, cash it out. And twice, once at 35, once at 42, Vivian cashed out a portion of her old 401k to cover the gap between jobs. Not the whole thing, just enough to handle the transition. $30,000 the first time, $32,000 the second. She'd gotten a signing bonus at the new company anyway. She told herself it would wash out. After taxes and early withdrawal penalties, she netted about $21,000 and $23,000 respectively. Felt like a temporary loan from herself, a bridge, something she'd make up later. She never did. Let me show you what that cost. $30,000 withdrawn at age 35. If left invested at a 7% average annual return, would have grown to approximately $228,000 by age 63. The $32,000 at 42, roughly $132,000. Combined, $360,000 in lost future value from two decisions that felt minor at the time, two checks that covered a couple months of bills between jobs. Cliff never had that decision to make. He worked at the same agency, contributed to the same TSP account for 31 consecutive years. No resets, no gaps, no vesting cliffs. No temptation to borrow from himself. The compounding never stopped. Not once, not for a single pay period. And here's the deeper layer. It's not just that Cliff didn't cash out. It's that the system never created a moment where cashing out was easy or felt necessary. Government employment is stable. Layoffs are rare. Transitions between agencies keep your TSP intact. The infrastructure is designed, almost stubbornly designed, to keep you invested. The private sector designs for mobility. That's great for career growth. It's terrible for compounding. Here's what ties all five forces together, and it's the thing that reframes everything we just walked through. The 401k was never designed to be a retirement plan. Section 401k of the Revenue Act of 1978 created a tax-deferred savings vehicle. That's it. It was meant to be a supplement, an additional layer on top of pensions and Social Security. A bonus, a nice-to-have, not the foundation. But starting in the 1980s, corporations realized something: defined benefit pensions are expensive, they carry long-term liabilities, they require actuarial management, they tie the company to promises that last decades after an employee walks out the door. The 401k was cheaper, simpler, and this is the part nobody says out loud: the risk transferred entirely to the employee. The company's obligation ended the moment the matching contribution hit the account. No more promises, no more liabilities, no more actuaries. And one by one, the private sector froze its pension plans, enhanced its 401k matches just enough to call it competitive, and walked away from the architecture that had built middle-class wealth for a generation. The federal government looked at the same instrument and made a fundamentally different decision. When FERS replaced the old civil service retirement system in 1987, the government didn't eliminate the pension. It reduced it, kept it as the foundation, and added the TSP on top. Pension as floor, TSP as accelerator, Social Security as third leg. One design choice, one institutional decision made nearly 40 years ago. That is the root of everything we've been talking about for the last 20 minutes. Cliff didn't do anything brilliant. He's the first person to tell you he doesn't understand half of what's in his TSP. He picked the C fund because someone in his office said it was the stock one. He never rebalanced. He never consulted an advisor. He never read a single book about retirement planning. He didn't have to. The architecture did the work. Vivian didn't do anything wrong. She earned more, saved what she was told to save, switched jobs when better opportunities appeared, and made every decision the system incentivized her to make. She followed the playbook the private sector handed her, and the playbook was incomplete. The problem wasn't Vivian, the problem was the system she was in. It was designed for corporate flexibility, not for individual wealth accumulation. And nobody told her the difference until it was too late to redesign the structure. And that is why so many retired government workers become quiet millionaires. Not because they're better with money, because they worked inside a machine that was designed, whether anyone intended it or not, to produce this result. Now, if you don't work for the government and never did, this might feel like a story about someone else's luck, like a system you missed out on. It's not, because the architecture works regardless of who builds it. The government didn't invent some secret formula. They just kept three principles in place that anyone can replicate and that the private sector made optional instead of automatic. First, make saving automatic and make stopping hard, not impossible hard. If your 401k or IRA requires you to make a conscious decision to contribute every month, you're fighting human nature. And human nature wins. Set it up once, set it to increase by 1% a year, and make the withdrawal process deliberately inconvenient. Don't give yourself the easy off-ramp that the system gave Vivian. Second, build an income floor that doesn't depend on your portfolio. This is the pension principle, and it's the most important one. Cliff's pension and Social Security cover his basic expenses without touching his TSP. If you don't have a pension, you build the equivalent. That might be Social Security optimization, delaying to 70 to maximize the guaranteed check. That might be a fixed annuity for a portion of your expenses. That might be rental income from a property you own outright. The vehicle doesn't matter. What matters is that your basic costs are covered by something that isn't your portfolio. Because the moment your portfolio has a job, the moment it has to generate your grocery money, it stops being wealth and starts being a paycheck on a timer. Third, solve healthcare before you retire, not after. If you're retiring before 65, your healthcare plan isn't optional. It's the single biggest variable in whether your money lasts. Price it, budget it, build it into the plan as a fixed cost, not a hope. This is the force that blindsides the most people, and it doesn't have to if you plan for it the way you plan for everything else. Cliff is still at the block party. He's on his second lemonade. The sun is getting low, and someone's kid is chasing the neighbor's dog across the lawn. Someone asks him how he's enjoying retirement, and he says, "Can't complain." That's it. 2 words. Can't complain. He doesn't know how to explain why he has $1.4 million. He'd probably tell you he just put a little away every paycheck, and he'd be right. That's exactly what he did. But what he wouldn't tell you, because he doesn't know, is that the system he worked in was designed to turn that little into a lot, quietly, automatically. Over 31 years of fluorescent-lit cubicles and Casio watches and deviled eggs in a Pyrex dish with a cracked lid. The question isn't whether Cliff got lucky. The question is, who's building the system for you? And if the answer is nobody, then you already know what you need to do next. If this gave you a new way to think about your own retirement architecture, take a second to subscribe. I cover the structural forces behind wealth and retirement that most channels never get to. I'll see you in the next one.